said that there were problems with the investigation, simply said something. We're not talking about using its criminal or civil powers, simply using the bullhorn that it had as the country's top law enforcement agency to discredit this election. He believed that may have been enough to get him to convince these folks at the state level to do more of what he wanted in throwing out these results. So what we're seeing here is this investigation, particularly on the Senate side, moving forward, getting these witnesses in front of them, some of them people that were at the tippy top of the Justice Department, to give an inside sense of what Trump was pressuring them and pushing them to do.
So, George Conway, we've grown numb to the scandals, to the attacks on our constitutional norms, the attacks on American democracy from Donald Trump and those around him. And when this story first broke several weeks ago, it seemed that some people's eyes kind of glazed over and kept moving on. Could you provide focus for us on just how dangerous this moment was in American history?
Well, this was absolutely one of the most dangerous moments in American history, the most dangerous moment ever caused by a president of the United States. And I think one of the reasons why some people's eyes glazed over is the point that Mike just made, which is that we've seen the movie before in some way, that President Trump would try to coerce federal agencies into doing things that are questionable, that benefit him personally. Even tried to coerce a foreign country into doing something that benefited him personally. But this was absolutely the most extreme possibility, that he would actually try to use the mechanisms of government, in particular the Department of Justice, to perpetuate himself in office unlawfully and to basically launch a self-coup, or an autogolpe as it's called. And this was, this was the height of this was a probable criminal conspiracy. There are a number of provisions that could apply to this conduct. There's a conspiracy to defraud the United States, 18 U.S.C. Section 371, which is what the Special Counsel Mueller used to charge the Russian Internet Research Agency. There's also 18 U.S.C. 610, which is kind of my personal favorite in this situation because it just seems so easy to apply, which is the criminal provision of the Hatch Act. And what that statute provides is that it shall be unlawful for anybody, and that would include the President of the United States, to coerce or attempt to coerce a federal employee into engaging in political activity. And what that would mean is that if Donald Trump had directed or tried to coerce Acting Attorney General Rosen to walking down Pennsylvania Avenue with a Trump 2020 flag, that would have been criminal. Here, this was much worse. He was attempting to coerce the Department of Justice, coerce Rosen into engaging in what was a purely political act, precisely because they had told the president that there was no interest of the United States in this, that there was no illegality, there was no law enforcement function to be performed by the Justice Department. And then Donald Trump went on to basically say, just say it, make this statement. That was all, as you pointed out, just for political purposes. That has been pointed out, that it was for political purposes to influence the political branches, the Congress, to overturn the election and to try to influence what the states were doing. And that, again, a purely political act coerced by the President of the United States, who, by the way, as these reports made clear, was basically threatening Rosen with removal and substitution by Jeffrey Clark, the guy who was actually who was basically conspiring with the president to overturn the election. And that's coercion. And it fits this statute like a glove. And the Justice Department, if it hasn't already, I know there's an Inspector General investigation, should begin a criminal investigation because there's sufficient predication for such an investigation.